Coming to you live from the fireball that is Phoenix, Arizona, where we are roasting up some cybersecurity topics that matter to you and your business or organization. Cybersecurity, compliance, management, Net Concepts, helping your business achieve reliability, security, and productivity. And now, your host of Net Concepts, Aaron Wagner.
Hi, and welcome to Net Concepts. Thank you for joining us. I am your host, Aaron Wagner, and today with me is Jesse T. from Turia. Say hello, Jesse.
Hey, how's it going?
It's going good. Glad to have you.
Thanks for having me.
So we're going to talk about today IP theft and privacy, especially when it comes to the the remote platforms for meetings and whatnot. And you guys are absolutely the expert in privacy on this, right?
Yes, definitely. A good person to bring onto the show.
So I'll start off, and I'm going to bring up some facts that I was able to pull from various different articles, and then once I get past that, then we'll dive deep into it. So first thing I want to cover today is about the U.S. Department of Justice, the FBI, put out a statement about foreign companies may try to illegally acquire companies' information. Foreign nations that seek to improve their economies and militaries target U.S. technology companies. Protect the programs and systems that support what makes your company successful and unique. If your company has a technological edge, expect your technology and those with access to it to be targeted. If your company has developed a process to manufacture an item that at less cost than others, that manufacturing process may be targeted. If your company is negotiating with another country, the negotiators' strategy may be targeted. If your company has invested time and resources in developing a product or idea, protect it. And that was from the FBI. Also, on September 26th, 2016, the U.S. Commerce Department released a comprehensive report on intellectual property and the U.S. economy in 2016, which found that IP-intensive industries support at least 45 million U.S. jobs and contribute to more than $6 trillion to the 38.2% of U.S. gross domestic product. And out of that, 1 in 5 companies say China has stolen their IP within the last year. The CNBC CFO survey found that 1 in 5 American-based corporations on the CNBC Global CFO Council says Chinese companies have stolen their intellectual property within the last year. In all, 7 of these 23 companies surveyed say the Chinese firms have stolen from them over the past decade. So as it turns out, I mean, it's definitely a national security risk when we're talking about such large amounts of money, so many U.S. jobs that are affected by intellectual property theft. Now, when we talk about the intellectual property and protecting it, there is a website called CSO Online. It has some really good articles about cybersecurity and things that you should keep in mind. So I'm going to read 10 tips to keep your intellectual property safe. First, you need to know what intellectual property you've got. If all employers understand what needs to be protected, they can better understand how to protect it and from whom to protect it. Number 2 is know where your intellectual property is. Printers, copiers, scanners, fax machines, cloud applications, and file sharing services. It could be from employees' personal devices. Third-party systems IP is often shared with business partners, suppliers, or customers. Make sure your contacts or contracts with those parties define how those third parties must secure your IP and have controls in place to ensure those terms are followed. Number 3, prioritize your intellectual property. Make a map of your company's assets and determine what information, if lost, would hurt your company the most. Then consider which of those assets are most at risk of being stolen. Number 4, label valuable intellectual property. If information is confidential to your company, put a banner or label on it that says so. If your company data is proprietary, put a note to the effect on every login screen. Number 5, secure your intellectual property both physically and digitally. Lock the rooms where sensitive data is stored, whether it's the server farm or the musty paper archive room. Keep track of who has the keys, use passwords, and limit employee access to important databases. Number 6, and this one goes across the board no matter if you're talking about intellectual property, you're talking about any kind of cybersecurity program of any kind, is to educate employees about intellectual property. Awareness training can be effective for plugging and preventing IP leaks, but only if it's targeted to the information that a specific group of employees needs to guard. When you talk in specific terms about something that engineers or scientists have invested a lot of time, they're very attentive. As is often the case, humans are often the weakest link in the defensive chain. That is why an IP protection effort that counts on firewalls and copyrights, but doesn't also focus on the employee awareness and training, is doomed to fail. Make sure you've controlled external email like Gmail and Yahoo, and also corporate email is another place that intellectual property can take away, can be exfiltrated. Number 7, know your tools to protect intellectual property. A growing variety of software tools are available for tracking documents and other IP stores. Data loss prevention tools are now the core component of many security suites. They not only locate sensitive documents, but also track of how they are being used. Encrypting IP, in some cases, will also reduce the risk of loss. The egress survey data shows that only 21% of companies require encryption when sharing sensitive data externally, and only 36% require it internally. Number 8 is get a big picture view. IP protection requires connections and communication between all corporate functions. The legal department has to play a role in IP protection. So does the human resources, IT, R&D, engineering, graphic design, and so on. Number 9 is to apply a counterintelligence mindset. If you were spying on your own company, how would you do it? Thinking through such tactics will lead you to consider protecting phone lists, shredding the papers in the recycle bin, convening an internal council to approve your R&D scientists' publications, or other ideas that may prove worthwhile for your particular business. And number 10 is to think globally. Think other countries. Think France, China, Latin America, and Russia, and of course China. So those are 10 things that you can do to protect your IP. The other thing is communication and how we communicate. Because I'll give you a really good example. I am currently studying for my ham exam, which is amateur radio. And I was thinking about amateur radio in that you can take an amateur radio and you can plug it into a voice IP network. You can plug it into a wireless access point and then go from a handheld radio to over the internet and make a phone call. And then I was thinking about the level encryption that's in these little handheld devices is pretty low. So that then turned me thinking about mobile phones and how secure mobile phones might be. And found an article about how the phone network is pretty much unprotected. So if you were having a meeting about intellectual property and somebody was using a mobile phone, they could tap into the entire conversation. So the other issues, I think, let's get into talking a little bit about Zoom and what might the issues with Zoom be, Jesse.
Yeah, so Zoom it's become extremely popular because of all the remote work in the past few months. But one of the big issues with Zoom is not only the lack of security, but also what they do with the information. So there's kind of two major issues with Zoom. So the one that you'll see a lot on the headlines is the security problems. So just as an example, Zoom was caught with the issue that they put a password field before you could join any meeting, but they didn't limit the amount of attempts you could do at the password. So anybody with some very basic coding skills could create a piece of code that goes through and attempts many, many different passwords until it gets the correct one. And the amount of attempts they can do, they can break the password within a few seconds. So this was the level of security they had. So they basically made the passwords useless. The other issue, which is notorious, was the Zoom bombing. They got caught routing calls through China, giving the Chinese government access to everything that was being said in those calls. And they've also, through all of the catastrophes that was going on and these scandals, they even admitted to eavesdropping on the calls that people have through Zoom. So this is something that people really need to consider when they're wanting to protect their intellectual property, like you were just going through. If you're using something like Zoom, you are probably asking for trouble when it comes to what could very well be your most valuable asset, is your intellectual property. If something like that gets into the wrong hands, it could literally be the death sentence for your company. The amount of time and investment that goes into a lot of these technologies at different companies or innovations, if you have it stolen by a foreign country, like you were just mentioning, the FBI warning people about that, that it could be really difficult to do anything about it. And it's much easier to prevent something like that from happening than to try and get revenge afterwards through a legal battle, for example.
And I think you and I have had a conversation in the past about the issues with Zoom going, okay, so I've had conversations with cybersecurity people, and they were like, oh, well, the problem with Zoom is not necessarily a security issue, it's a privacy issue, blah, blah, blah. Well, you touched on the fact that people can listen in, or Zoom themselves can listen in to a conversation. But that's not the only part of that problem, is it? It's also the CCP and that part of the equation.
Yeah, exactly. So one of the things that the U.S. government even wants to call Zoom to answer some questions on is their actual relationship with China and the Communist Party specifically. The company is, I like to say, technically an American company because they're headquartered in California, but the vast majority of all their engineers and employees are in mainland China, and what that really means is that they're beholden to the Chinese government. If they don't comply with anything that the Chinese government requests, they can shut down their entire operation. If 90% of your company is in China and they make a request for you to, let's say, give them access to every single phone call that's going on Zoom, if you deny that request, you're basically having 90% of your business disappear. So this is the kind of thing people really need to understand when they're getting involved with a solution like Zoom.
Right. And I think, we also had an example of where that problem with the CCP stepping into Zoom's business has happened, and that was those people that were having a meeting within the United States about the Tiananmen Square issue, and then the CCP told Zoom they needed to ban all those accounts, and they did it.
Exactly. Yeah, so that incident brings up a few questions. So the first one is they specified that they had end-to-end encryption. They were bragging about this. Turned out they were completely lying, 100% false. None of the calls are end-to-end encrypted. So they already got caught lying. The second thing they claimed is that paid accounts would have the encryption and they wouldn't be able to eavesdrop. Well, then how is it that the Chinese government and Zoom are knowing that these people are having a Tiananmen Square vigil over a Zoom call so that they can then shut it down? And then, of course, the last one is this is an American group based out of I believe it was based out of California. It's a nonprofit, paid account, and from the request of the Chinese government, they shut it down. So now you're even having the Chinese government being able to shut down groups within the United States via Zoom. So yeah, there's a very interesting incident that I think made it very clear what Zoom is actually all about.
Yeah, and I think that got back to, we started talking about TikTok as well, and what the implication of Microsoft purchasing TikTok would entail. It's because it's tied to the China. It's put out by ByteDance, which ByteDance employs a whole host of Communist Party members that are writing the code. So the code is worth nothing. Because they could always, like you said, create a bunch of backdoors.
Yeah. And
what else I'll let you take it from there.
Yeah, so the thing with the Microsoft acquisition of TikTok, this acquisition would not necessarily solve the privacy concerns. We've seen with incidents when it comes to Chinese companies, when it comes to privacy on the hardware end, where they, for example, Huawei built a server farm for the Papua New Guinea government, and it turns out that everything that was on that hardware was sending everything to the spy agency of China. So you can buy the hardware from the Chinese company and repurpose it or do something else with it, but they still have all those back doors built in. So one of the concerns is that Microsoft is buying TikTok, which will then allow it to continue to operate within the United States. But that doesn't necessarily mean that all these back doors or access or ways of infiltrating the app have been solved.
Right, and I think
so it's a little bit concerning. Right,
and I would carry that over into what do we really know about Zoom as far as those particular issues. Does TikTok have that problem, but Zoom doesn't? And then if so, why? I mean, how do we know?
It's true.
And I think if we look at, you also had some opinions on Teams, and I think Teams is important because if I go and I buy Office 365, and with the pandemic, so many companies went and bought licenses for Office 365. I never really thought about the end-to-end encryption until you brought it up and why it's important.
Yeah, so that's there's Teams, and there's a lot of other solutions akin to Teams, and there's video conferencing solutions that aren't blatantly doing anything ridiculous like Zoom. So if we remove Zoom out of the equation, okay, we can all agree nobody, if they want to protect their intellectual property, they should definitely not be using Zoom.
Right.
But then when we look at the other solutions like Microsoft Teams, the problem is now back to more of the security side. These companies have access to your data. These companies actually, some of the main business models, the main ways they make money is actually by reading your information. So Google is a prime example of this. If you send anything through Gmail, Google has already read that. You're even typing something in your email. They're already reading every single word that you're typing. So that is definitely a red flag if you're wanting to keep something private, and if you don't want, some of these companies might even be your competitor. These companies are quite large. They have a lot of subsidiaries. They do all kinds of things, especially in tech. And so you probably don't want to be giving access to your intellectual property to your competitor by using their service.
Yeah.
So all of them have complete access to your data. They can still do the same kind of things of, if you're doing a call through Microsoft Teams, Microsoft can access that call. And so this leads to more issues where potential breaches can happen.
And I just want to bring one thing up real quick when it comes to the Google reading your email. Now, I've seen articles online where people try to debunk whether Google can read your email, and they can't. They technically, there isn't an individual that necessarily reads emails. It can be AI, but that's still reading the email.
Correct. Yeah. Exactly.
And the other issue, with Teams, I mean, it comes back to that old, idea of Microsoft and security, and how, Microsoft has a checkered history when it comes to security. And I'll give you one example that just popped up recently. And these things are going to keep, security issues are hard to stay on top of. But recently, it was discovered that you could redirect a link in Teams by using SMB links and WebDAV folders. Well, that's never, they saw it, identified that, oh yeah, that's a problem, but it's also a feature, so there's nothing we can do about it.
Yeah, and that's also reminds me of Outlook itself, right? The number one way businesses get compromised is through emails and these links. So using a solution like Teams doesn't necessarily completely protect you from that, especially if you're using Outlook and Teams. You still have Outlook, you can still get compromised.
So, one thing that I really enjoyed our conversation that we had prior to this was when you explained to me about what end-to-end security looks like and why it's important, and the way that you put it, I think was just totally spot on. If you could review that for me. Yeah.
So what really defines what end-to-end encryption is very different from just saying encryption. And what we do at Taria is not even end-to-end encryption. It's actually a no-knowledge end-to-end encryption. So it's an even longer. So this gets very like tech jargon. But the simple way of thinking about it is encryption is locking something. And when you lock something, it's probably something you want to protect. So the thing I like to describe to people is visualize having a lock box. It's a metal box, has a key, you put something inside, you lock it up, and you want to pass this to someone. Well, the important thing is who has the key to unlock it. If you and everybody else in the world has the key, having it in the lockbox is pointless. Anybody can open it. So what you really want is, I want to have the key, and whoever I want to be able to open it will have the key, but nobody else. One of the big problems with a lot of tech companies is that they will say, okay, you have the key, your coworker has the key, and we also have the key. Oh, and we're going to open it when you pass it to us, and we're going to check what's inside. And so this is one of the things that companies will kind of mislead people and say, oh, our stuff's encrypted. But that doesn't necessarily mean they can't access your information. So then we're back into the same problem that I was mentioning before, where Microsoft and Google and these other companies can still read and access all of your data. So the important thing that we do differently at Taria is we actually encrypt it in a way that only you and the other person has the key. We don't touch the keys. So you're handing when you want to deliver something to them, we're just passing off the lockbox. We don't have any way of opening it. And so what that means is we like to say that you can trust us because you don't have to. When you use a company like Zoom or Teams or Microsoft or Google, a lot of the arguments is, oh, but maybe they're not looking, or they're a large company, maybe you can trust them, but this is all trust based on what, right? It's based on nothing. You have to, you know that they have complete access to everything you're doing, and you have to hope that they don't look at it. With us, we like to joke that you don't have to trust us because we can't access it, even if we wanted to. So it's completely protected. And that's extremely important because you could be dealing with, of course, intellectual property, financial information. You could be having a conversation with the owners of the company that you don't want it to be seen by anybody else. There's also been scandals at these large tech companies of employees accessing people's photo libraries, email conversation, message conversations when they weren't supposed to. But the reason that happened is because they could access it. So a lot of people think, oh, I can trust Microsoft because of the name Microsoft. But we have to always remember that these companies are made up of thousands, if not tens of thousands of people. And you trust every single one of those people at that company not to be accessing your information?
Yeah,
I
think a good example of that is with what happened to Capital One. So Capital One did everything that they could in their power to make sure that the data was protected. However, it was an Amazon employee where their data was stored that was able to was the person who made it leak.
Exactly. Yeah, and when you're using a service, you have to be thinking, where is that data being stored? Everybody at that company has access to the server, but also the host of the server. Is it being hosted with Amazon? Is it being hosted with Microsoft, Google? Amazon recently is now getting into some hot water because people are claiming that Amazon is now stealing their intellectual property via potentially their servers by being able to access their information there. That's some of the accusations being thrown out. Now, the thing I like to say about protecting your IP is it's better to protect it from being stolen in the first place, and it's much harder to try and do something afterwards, right? So imagine how difficult of a case it must be to prove that Amazon stole your IP. It's a very difficult case to prove, and it's even harder if you were talking about China or another foreign government or nation that stole your IP. Good luck trying to do something about it. So it's much more effective to take the precaution ahead of time.
And like the example that I gave earlier is about a physical device. So it's where LED lights. So it's very those LED lights are going to go somewhere to some warehouse that's in the United States before it ships to the end customer. Whereas something that might be software it doesn't have to actually reside in a warehouse. So how would you be able to then go after the end retailer if they could throw up their hands and say, well, it's not something that was in the United States ever?
Yeah. It's basically impossible.
Yeah.
You might hear a story here or there, but the vast majority of times these things happen. And you were reading earlier, 1 out of 5 companies were saying that they had something stolen by China. I'm sure 99% of the time that they're basically told there's nothing they can do, because that's the sad truth of it.
Correct. Now, but let's. Why don't you tell me how, I would, if I wanted to get your service, where I would go, and also if you have a partner program, how does that work?
Yeah, so our solution is we like to say it's a 4-in-1 solution. It handles all your instant messaging communication, scheduling, calendar, file management, cloud storage, and as well as the video conferencing capability. And every single thing that you put into the platform is that end-to-end encryption that only you and the people that you give access to can actually get that information. So that's very important because you can also access control, right? Who in your company has access to this kind of information? And the solution is free for 30 days for people to try. So people listening, if they want to try it out, they can try for 1 month completely free. And they can go to our website, taria.com. And we also have a partner program. We like working with partners. And so if anybody who's interested in becoming a partner, they can also reach us out at sales@taria.com. And that's TAURIA. And then we'd love to talk to them.
Great, Jesse. I really appreciate you taking the time and talking to us today. And giving us the valuable information on encryption and the different systems out there. And thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to Net Concepts with your host, Aaron Wagner. For more info, please go to ncarizona.net. Net Concepts, helping your business achieve reliability, security, and productivity.